what I was saying was that this emerged a year plus ago when I found out that some colleagues in the UK had written a paper in support of developing some team coaching competencies, and they had found a model I had developed about 15 years ago quite helpful. And I thought, oh, maybe I should go back and kind of revisit that. And I realized the world and coaching have changed so much since that time. And then kind of one thing led to another, and the ID program, our integrated development program, was humming along, and I decided to kind of, as a culmination of 25 years of time in the coaching space, kind of work on a new paradigm for developing coaches. For those of you who have studied with me before, most of this will not be surprising, but it's just a really wonderful opportunity to reimagine what coaching needs to be now, could be now, what the world wants from coaching now, and what that means for all of us in terms of our own future in this space. Feels like everybody became a coach and became an author during the pandemic. And so every time you turn around, there's more coaches. And so this is an opportunity for us to think about what we might do in that. A central theme of the entire time is that because of many of the pressures, I suppose, of Western culture, we end up sort of highly prioritizing the quest for mastery. But in my experience over the years, the coaching skills to get them the first time around are pretty straightforward. But what really makes a coach or someone who's doing coaching stand out is their maturity. And particularly because the issues that our clients are bringing are so much more complex, they're so much more existential, they're so much more in the unknown often that it's not about learning more parts of the brain or picking up 12 new skills. It's really about, can we be mature as a human being to be with them? And so I'm going to just give you a taste of a few pieces of this. In the next hour and a half, we'll have a couple of opportunities for you to stop, ask questions, a couple of times even to talk to each other, and to make this interactive as much as possible. As we go along, I just would encourage you to use the chat box. And for us to get started, before I put up the first content slide, I would love it if you in the chat box would just write a couple of words about what brought you here. Like, what are you curious about that led you to want to come and spend an hour and a half with us? Again, I always like starting with a little bit of humor, Jim. That's good. Um, mm, 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 mm. Fun. I look forward to reading these later. Um, all right. So let me, I'm going to put up the slides. And here we go. On our, there. So I just want to say a couple of things that even about the title. It's so funny, you organize things in advance, you kind of try to make up a title, then you finish the slides and you try to figure out, does the title still work? And I thought, yeah, it actually does. But I wanted to say a few things about the words that I chose for the title because it answers a couple of your questions in the chat box. So this is not a session about how to be a Kardashian. And for me, the market is only really crowded if you want to stand in the same place as everybody else. The market is actually flattening in many ways, in my experience, through the rise of technology, through the diversification of the coaching population, the kinds of places and people and scenarios that are calling for coaching, and the fact that there's probably more people integrating coaching into their existing job than there are now people becoming coaches for the first time. So standing out really is not about waving your arms and wildly and having a better marketing campaign. It's actually learning how to stand still and be still in a way to sense what's actually happening as opposed to trying to compete with everybody else. And so again, for me, I think a huge variable in that is the rise of one's maturity. And the reality is you can't teach maturity. You have to sort of live your way into maturity, which already sets in motion a different way of thinking about developing coaches. Um, and so we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So some of these slides I just put up, you can read just to take a break from listening, but also just to kind of absorb it at your own pace. So let's just start right here. So we are every day, one of my ways I measure my days is, did I praise or curse my technology in my life? Which one was carried the day? So technology will increasingly be part of our, not only our journeys as coaches, but also the ways in which we support the growth of our clients. And so part of it is our willingness to engage in all the factors that are shaping our world and shaping our lives, and recognizing how they're affecting us as practitioners, but also how they're affecting our clients. And in many ways, sometimes it's easy to feel like we're creating a world we don't want. And so one of the things I write about in the paper as a former sociologist was, we need to get out of the sort of sanctity of our little coaching hour or a coaching room and actually move farther upstream from where our clients' issues are coming from and seeing what we know about coaching and people might be helpful there. And secondly, finding ways, particularly with the aid of technologies, where we can go downstream to where our clients go after they leave the session, so that we have more ways to support them in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. And then for the purposes of our talk today, actually more ways of being in business. If we're competing against hundreds of other coaches for a coaching hour or coaching dollars, then we're going to be in a very crowded space. But I think that if we think of coaching as, and remember that it's a verb, not a noun, that coaching as a session is one form of coaching, but I suspect a lot of the growth in coaching will come from imagining new ways of using what we now call coaching, such that what we think of as coaching now will just be one small example of what we do. Those of you who know me know that I always come back to this slide in a way. And I had an occasion just a couple of days ago to remind myself of the importance of this. And I put it here always because I just like to tip my hat to Robin whenever I can. But and the reality, at the end of the day, my experience is that our clients don't really care much about coaching. They just want to feel better. They want to do better. They want to do new things. And for that, they often are bringing to our conversations with them a lot of things that are going on in the background for them, around the stories they're telling themselves, the stories they're immersed in, the stories they're battling. And so a lot of what I come back to when I see this quote from Robin is just to remind myself again and again to stop coaching long enough to pay attention to what's actually happening, so that I can actually sense more of what Robin's quote is getting at. For those of you who we'll stop in a couple of minutes and take some questions if there are any, but for those of you who are new to me and the work, most of this from today and most of the origins of the pieces of the paper came out of the work that evolved from narrative coaching, and I'll let you read that there. So there are a lot of things I could say here, but I'll just say one thing quickly in this under the umbrella of our topic for today. So I'm working, as some of you know, with a platform called Ovida, helping them use this body of work to build out the next generation of their platform. And one of the things which has to do with generating feedback and using AI to support the interpretation of feedback to make it easier for managers and supervisors and mentors to support people's growth. What they're finding, though, is that in a lot of the bigger organizations where they've already gotten traction with their platform, people are loving the experience. They're getting great value from the information, and they're not quite sure what to do with it because they're used to putting people in boxes. You're a trainer, you're a coach, you're an OD consultant, you're a change manager, you're an HR people person. And in reality, all of those things presume that you can determine ahead of time what people need. You can scale it for cost reasons to reach more people, and on and on and on and on. But in reality, that's not how most people actually learn at all. And so, again, going back to this idea of creating opportunities for our own ability to stand out, one of the things you'll see here and in a few moments is that one of the opportunities is to partner with technologies allow users, or in this case, clients, to be supported in implementing what comes out of the coaching session. Because in reality, and we had a great example in one of our classes a couple of weeks ago about somebody through kind of a prank, if you will, from his brother, got stranded on the side of what he thought was going to be a beginner ski slope, but was not. And then kind of what happened as a result of that. And it was a great example of he didn't need to go to ski school. He didn't need to read a few books on skiing. He just needed a few tips about how to get down the hill and not die. Um, and so, more and more, given the pace in the world that we live in, people are going to need developmental support in much smaller pieces that are customized for them and sort of when they need it, as they need it, et cetera. And I think for me, you start to think creatively about coaching, particularly like I said it with the adjunct of technology, opens up all kinds of doors around how we might grow our businesses, adapt our businesses. So, for example, we coaching from the early days borrowed the idea of a therapeutic hour from psychotherapy. And so most coaching sessions are often an hour long for no real scientific reason or no, but other than that's what we sort of absorbed from therapy. But what instead of having an hour, you had 6 10-minute sessions spaced over time with resources in between, which is in reality, unless it's a big issue, a far more effective strategy for most people. So again, I think it's not that if you think of coaching as one thing, the market is very crowded and some of this can get a bit daunting. But if you begin to realize it's an active dynamic verb, then I think we start to discover there's lots of ways to begin to not only stand out, but do well for your business. All right, 2 more slides and then we'll stop for a minute. So these are kind of heavy lifting slides a little bit, but I couldn't figure out any simpler way of just getting these 2 key points across. So in the paper, there are 3 pillars of what I'm proposing as a new paradigm for developing coaches. So across the top in the orange are, I didn't put this in the slides because it just would take too much time, but there's a model in the paper looking at the co-development of coaches and clients across 5 elements of a coaching conversation. The persons involved, the relationship between them, the skills they each have, the process they choose to engage in, and the outcomes that come as a result. For you all as practitioners, we then look at 3 sort of pillars. One is there's 5 maturities, there's 5 masteries built on top of those maturities. And then we use the IB model from our ID program, which stands for, as you see here, identity, mindset, environment, aspiration, and behavior. Those are all the factors from my research on the sort of variables that contribute to performance. So in the working with people, it requires a sense of personal maturity. And there's a little definition of each of these in a minute, so hold on. The more you can evolve your capacity, what can you draw on in yourself? And then lastly, what then affects the mindset you bring to coaching. And it sort of works like the amino acids for a protein. That the value of a protein to our body is in many ways the same as the lowest amino acid content. So the same thing here. You could have like brilliant skills. You could be a master at the coaching process, but you don't engage in any kind of vulnerable, meaningful way with people very easily. And you tend to think mostly of yourself as opposed to the coaching relationship. So each of these three pillars supports kind of is particularly one of the aspects of the coaching conversation. And so spiritual maturity has to do with seeing and sort of sensing our ability to be clear about what's happening in the relationship, to notice what the person is valuing, striving for, aspiring to. And then you can see kind of all the way across. So one of the things that I just want to draw your attention to, and we'll explain each in a minute, but is that competencies are in this framework, but competencies are only one of 5 masteries. And my argument in the paper is that we completely overweight the value and predominance of competencies. And as we'll see in a few minutes, competencies are great for beginners. They help people get the lay of the land, the basic expectations, the basic sort of macro skills. And the farther you advance in your career, the less useful competencies are as markers or guides for your growth. And then in the paper, we talk a lot about it just leads to conformity and a bunch of other things that are not particularly helpful to evolve a person or actually evolve the field. So just want to show in the report, we kind of go into this all in great detail to begin to think about moving away from a behaviorist, sort of individualistic, competency-based way of thinking of developing coaching, but actually develop a model that's actually more reflective of the dynamic nature of coaching itself. And again, just want to sort of give you a taste for some of this. And then this is just a very, 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 very brief description of each of them. So you can use this to develop yourself. You can use this to develop somebody else. So maybe you have a colleague comes to you and say, I'm just really struggling with this client, and I'm not quite sure what's not right, but it doesn't seem to be working the way I'd hoped to be. We've got some resources in the paper to show kind of how to unpack that. But in essence, we're asking ourselves, where are they not as strong as they could be, or what's being triggered in them in one of their areas of development by this particular client or development dilemma. So our personal maturity allows us to draw on things within ourselves. If we have, like, for example, significant unresolved grief in our life, and we are coaching somebody who had a very unexpected and sudden job loss, we're going to be at more of a handicap, regardless of how good of a coach is, because we feel uncomfortable, consciously or not, about grief, because we have not dealt with it in our own life. So we can't draw from that in terms of being with the person very easily. Spiritual maturity really has to do with how much we can see and sense. It's our clarity. The more mature we are, the more we can see. Easiest way to think about this one is if you've ever had a relationship that broke up, you probably had a story about that when it happened. And over time, that story changes as you get clearer and clearer about what actually happened. And all the layers of awakening or clarifying that comes to you as a result. And when we feel more mature this way, we're less attached, we're more present, and we see things, we see more things, and we are more clear on what we do see. professional maturity is where most of us spend our professional development money. It's the one we recognize the most. This is basically, do you know what you're doing, and can you do what's necessary to fulfill that role? Social maturity, these last two are ones that are not often talked about, but capability is how well you can do this, but it's not just in terms of performance, but are you astute about the political realities that you're coaching in? Are you sensitive to culture and people that are not the same as you? Can you pace yourself and time your interventions? Um, and social maturity, again, comes back to our awareness of the environment. So again, I think one of the gifts we've gained from those that work in that kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion spaces are helping us notice where our blind spots are so that we don't make assumptions about people, but have the maturity about the environments from which they're coming and the environments to which they're returning. And then the last one is the ability to bring all this together in real time. And our credibility one has two facets. It's do we even understand what's happening or why it had the effect it did? It's not about understanding everything about the client, it's understanding what's unfolding in this session. If you don't know anything about adult development or anything about transition management, then it's going to be hard for you to both understand what the client's talking about, but also to achieve good results because you don't have a frame or a lens to look at what's actually happening. All right, so I'm going to just stop there, and we're going to move into our little pieces for today. But I just wanted to see if Vicky, if there's anything interesting and it feels important to you in the chat box, or anybody wants to raise your hand, but probably easier to put in the chat box. Will be easier for Vicky to spot.
Well, there were lots of responses to why people are here.
Yeah.
And just a couple of comments so far. No questions so far.
Okay.
But maybe if someone has a question, they'd like to raise their hand. I'm seeing Irene.
Wasn't sure if I couldn't find the reaction button fast enough.
Okay.
This is so aligned, David, with what I've discovered in these last years and where my work has gone, and the stuff around spiritual maturity and clarity. So much of it becomes about what has meaning for clients, and that's a discovery process that happens in the course of time. And the other one around contextual maturity, I hadn't seen it described that way, but it made me think about the times when you're with someone and because of the experience and one's own growth and maturity and what we've learned, I can pull something from this and over there and here and be like, does this work? It's that piece. I just have to say how much I love the way that you've put this together. And it really helps me feel like I've been starting to wonder. I've had a long time feelings of not fitting in, but I was like, okay, that's why I don't fit in, because this is how I see it, not just tick the boxes and that kind of thing. So thank you. But those were two pieces that I had just a little extra levels.
Yeah, and the gift of this is they don't fit in you either. So yeah. So I want to say I am. Scarlett, Fiona, did you want to say something?
Yes, I do. Hi, David. One of the things you had said before you brought this particular slide up, in terms of weighting, that we put a lot of weight on the competency portion. And while I would agree with you, I would also say that we put there is a great amount of emphasis on the credibility meaning in the accreditations that we would have.
Yeah.
So I remember a few years back when I did my initial training with you, I'm a devotee, if you will, in terms of your thinking. I am not an ICF accredited coach, primarily based on certainly some of the conversations that you and I had had. Yet I am of the mindset that whatever the reason for coaching, whether it's professional development or personal development, there shouldn't be a one or the other. It is a human development. I think when you do the personal development, you're impacting the professional side. And when you're doing the professional side, you're impacting the personal. So the reason I share all of that with you is because I agree with the weighting on the competency, that there tends to be that emphasis. But I think right now there's so much credibility, or so much more emphasis on the credibility. Do you have this particular accreditation? Do you have this one? And if you don't, you are oftentimes discounted. And I know that based on my coaching and my methodologies and my framework and everything that I bring to the table, the coaching that I bring is far more, if you will, organic, in the moment, to what they need at that time, rather than, you know. So I just wanted to offer that up, because credibility is right now the big thing. That was what triggered me.
Yeah, no, and I would argue that there's almost no correlation between accreditation and credibility.
I would agree. Absolutely, 1000%.
It can be, but they're not. I mean, there's many certified whatever people, we do that as well, that are actually quite good at this, but it's a false connection in a way. And the reason, one of the reasons is because to be credible in some systems, actually you diminish your contextual maturity in order to fulfill the requirements that are asked of you. And I see this hundreds of times over from students who struggle between their authentic best self when they're coaching and what certification systems often ask of them. So I'm not going to fight this fight, but I'm going to have for 25 years. But we given the number of people, the experience of the people that are coming into coaching or using coaching, most of whose previous experience doesn't count towards any of that, unlike other professions, if you will, that we need to find other ways of assessing and developing coaches that actually looks at credibility in both of those senses of the word. And because in a crowded market, people want to have a strong feeling that what you're offering works. And sort of like going to school proves you're really good at school. It may or may not have anything to do with how intelligent you are, how gifted you are, how talented you are. And so I want to get away from these sort of standardized approaches that don't really measure. Not only do they not measure what somebody's actually capable of doing, but it doesn't actually help people actually get better, other than getting better at passing tests.
It's like misleading advertising. And
Yeah,
so this
could be.
conversation is, you asked earlier, why are we here? What brings us to this session? This is what's bringing me to the session. How do I stand out? So thank you.
Okay. And so we'll just take a couple more quickly and then we'll move on. Okay, Vicky? Vicky?
Yeah, so Hassan has been waiting.
Yes.
I know. Would you like to unmute yourself?
There we go.
Yes. Actually, my question is also around the credibility. You said credibility is our understanding of this during the session, and isn't that more like capacity instead of credibility?
No, it really has to do with the practical uses of this would be, you know, if you go to the doctor and you give the doctor a list of symptoms or things you're concerned about or whatever, and they, you know, if they're a holistic doctor, they'll give you a wide range of things. If they're more of a Western doctor, they might just give you a few things, but they make some recommendations. And then you might ask them, well, that's really interesting, or I didn't know about that. Can you explain why you think that would work? So if a credible doctor will be able to explain why they believe that that will work for you, or why they believe that the treatment you've been getting is not working, or whatever is happening. and secondly, I want to go to a doctor that actually has success in treating or being with people with symptoms like myself. So I've had some iteration of COVID for 16 months. It's been quite the roller coaster. So this morning I found a woman that has a brilliant expertise in vestibular and ocular malfunction, which means balancing and hearing, well, mostly seeing. And so she did these little minor tests, which were mind-blowingly difficult. But she had credibility for me because she had expertise in the specific thing that I needed. And so the credibility is, if upon reflection, can the coach give you an articulate story about why they did what they did, why they think it had the outcome it did, and what they would have done differently based on their understanding of what happened. I also want to know from the coach, did the client feel satisfied? Did the client make progress that was meaningful to the client? Is what the coach did successful? So that's how I would see them being different. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome, Carol. And we'll move on.
Hi, David. I certainly know why I was called to be on this call today, and great to see you. I just wanted to share with you when you talked about the box. From my perspective, whether it's in coaching or actually any profession, why do we even think we need a box? Let's really step into, from my perspective, what narrative coaching offers and look at who we are and what we are bringing forward without looking at it from a box perspective.
Yeah.
We all have rich stories and a richness to bring, and the world is waiting for each and every one of us. It truly is, David.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah. Great. So now that you've mastered this, we're going to move on. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in the paper. So I took the occasion to kind of riff on the narrative coaching model, to look at sort of five, I guess, messages or elements of what it means to stand out. One of the key pieces at the back of the paper is kind of looking at what is coaching missing, or what would coaches need and coaching need kind of to mature itself and kind of grow. And I, again, went back to my early roots and talked a lot about initiation and rites of passage. And many other full-on professions have apprenticeship programs. They have sort of gauntlets that practitioners move through to mark different stages. And we have these sort of faux markers with certifications, but they don't really often mean a lot. And so I just use this to kind of organize just like one thought for each of these five I'd like to share with you. I'll do the first two, then we'll stop and give you a chance to talk in some small groups. Again, if someone decides to take on coaching, either as a practitioner or I just got back from the Institute of Coaching, Healthcare and Leadership conference, and in my program there were a number of surgeons as well as coaches. And so they're wanting to take up coaching because they realize they often lack sometimes communication skills and relational skills. They want to have better relationships with their client, their patients. And so for them, there's an initiation because in order for them to involve themselves in coaching, they're going to have to develop the part of themselves that's not completely attached to the medical model, because the coaching model is in many ways quite different. So that's an initiation in a way to surrender part of what they fought really hard to develop in their ability to be a doctor. And I was talking to one of the surgeons about why I chose the surgeon I did for the replacement of my shoulder earlier this year. And it was all about their capacity to meet me as a human being. All three had the same ratings, the same, skills, same whatever, but one of them was far better than the other two. So we think about kind of going around the circle here. So we'll talk a little bit about standing out, this sort of initiation. What is it? What is being asked of you or called in you in terms of where you need to develop yourself the most next? We're going to look at the hallmark of maturation from a Jungian perspective, this notion of individuation, coming to full terms of ourself as a unique human being, and therefore being able to see others more clearly. Kind of move around to this idea of incorporate. How do we bring more skills into ourselves? How do we ingrain those in kind of how we are with people? And then we kind of come around to the top of integration that becomes a capability. We have now the emotional maturity and clarity. We've built skills, but now we can start to use it with more and more wisdom, the more we can integrate that. And then the last one is what I just think of, because I like the eyes, incarnate. So it becomes part of who we are. One of the things that stood out for me in the research on expertise for this paper was a comment around, which I won't try to pronounce because if I have any of my Danish friends on the call, they're going to mock my complete butchering of his name. But this is around the credibility. It's become, as with experts, it has become who we are. We don't even think about it anymore. We don't have to memorize it. We don't need steps. It's just how we work now. And that's sort of the ultimate destination. So I just want to share a couple of thoughts about these first two, and then we'll give you a chance to just talk a few minutes for yourselves. And then again, all of these are covered in more depth in the paper. So, what is maturity? Well, so immaturity would be similar to you. Somebody calls up and they want, and you decide to organize a dinner party at your house in a few hours, and getting all excited, and you realize, oh, I'd love to have some flowers on the table, and you go out and look at that into your rose garden if you have one, and then you start yelling at the bushes to grow faster because you need roses by dinner. So maturity allows us to be sort of in flow with the rhythm and of what's actually happening. It allows us to let go of things about ourselves that don't serve us or our clients, and to kind of step into a very different journey with a very different pace. So I just want to put up two data points, if you will, from the paper that talk a bit about kind of where we missed the mark, I believe, and where I think it would behoove us to invest more so we stand out compared to most coaches. So the first one is that if you were to scan the popular coaching literature or go to a popular coaching conference, a lot of the attention is paid to our method and or our brand, even though method by and large has almost zero impact in terms of outcomes. Most any decent method done well has good outcomes. Some better for some people, but not nearly as much as we think. And for us, often for coaches, it's about gathering more information and knowledge, which is really not what that should be about, I suppose. Then the relationship, and at the very end, we talk a lot about the clients, but in reality, if you look at the other column, by far and away, the greatest order of variance in terms of outcomes are things related to the client. And yet, in terms of developing clients, of developing ourselves as coaches or assessing ourselves, we're assessing the coach. Now, we're assessing them as they're coaching or about their coaching. But in reality, I look at in coaching, if that's what you do, it really has only one purpose, which is to make the client more aware and capable than what they were when they came in. Which means that everything that we're doing for ourselves, we need to do as much, if not more, for the client. it doesn't matter to me if I were your supervisor and I observed you and it was a brilliant demonstration of coaching. That would not mean as much to me if indeed nothing happened for the client. And it's not that we're responsible for the client, but again, we sometimes worry too much of, am I doing a perfect job as a coach? It doesn't matter at one level after a certain point. I had a conversation when I was young in my early 20s with an informal, impromptu mentor who had a high school education. And I learned so much from him. My dad had been gone a lot for work, so I didn't see him a lot when I was young. And so for me as a young man, it was a godsend. He wasn't coaching me. He had no degrees, no training. He was just kind of a guy in town who did handiwork, had some money, so he owned a lot of the buildings he was working on. But again, there's often an inverse relationship between what the evidence suggests is more impactful and where we tend to spend most of our time. So a lot of what this paradigm is offering is a way to center the client truly as the measure of what we're doing. This is compounded by another piece of research, which shows this. And if you look at if a company is paying you to coach one of their executives, they might pay some money for some 360s or some instruments. But by and large, if we leave those out and you're just talking about the people that are involved, there's going to be some time spent, getting the work and getting oriented and getting started. But it doesn't have a lot of direct benefit usually, and it maybe has kind of a medium level of investment sometimes, and sometimes that too is low. The actual cost of the coaching time is by far and away the highest investment, but in reality, it does not yield most of the benefit. Most of the benefit from coaching is the thing we spend the least amount of money and time on, which is what do people do when they leave? Again, it doesn't matter in some ways if you have a brilliant coaching session and the client doesn't change. It doesn't mean that that's your fault. It just means that we might want to take some of our time and our money again. And I think part of standing out is starting to innovate about how we bring what we know to serve our clients in ways that are meaningful to them and align with all the evidence. And so, like I said, the example I've now started to use with some of my clients is if we're going to focus on the one thing at a time, then this coaching session could be 10 or 15 minutes, which means 45 minutes of their paid time can be used either in pre-work to get them really warmed up in a meaningful way, but most importantly, what they're able to do when they go and how do we structure that and how do I make myself available to them at those moments where they're going to need that after they've left the session. All right, so that's the first one. Again, I'm just going to put in a couple of points from the paper just to kind of give you a sense of what's possible here. We're doing a webinar series for Institute of Coaching starting next week, and we'll unpack all of these in terms of helping you create sort of a design document for yourself out of all of the paper in terms of where you might want to focus your development energy for yourself. So let's just look at the second one, then we'll stop. Here we go. So the second one is around using this work to stand out by becoming more of yourself. So I'll let you read this for a minute, and then we'll talk a bit about what I mean by this. Right. So I wrote that because of this. So what we find is that there's like 3 pages sort of documenting all the research about why competencies are nowhere near enough for what we need. It doesn't help coaches or coaching or clients in the ways that we think it does. But as part of that, competencies after a certain point, what they end up doing is sort of devolving into measuring levels of conformity with And for me, again, there's value in that. There's good to put up guardrails and to know kind of where the out of bounds markers are and kind of what's hoped for. But in reality, it also distinguishes or extinguishes the fire of our own individuality, or doesn't honor our own background. I would never qualify for an ICF certification because I would refuse to follow many of those competencies, and I still feel very effective. And I myself would like more support to get more feedback of myself, which is why I'm doing work with Ovida. But competency models will not be useful to me. There's other things that I would need instead. And so part of that is, the biggest piece of that is that any mastery that I'm going to assess or develop is always built on a maturity. And so this wonderful quote from Gabor Mate is really helpful here, that again, if we get too locked into things like goals and plans and structures and agendas, it makes the presumption that the person has the emotional maturity, the identity, agility, etc., to be able to shift, to be able to do something differently. And most of our clients are not, the struggles of most of our clients is less about their mastery and more about their lack of maturity in some aspect of their life related to whatever the topic is. And so I want to be able to help them work on their maturity so they have a solid foundation for whatever else they're going to try that's new. And then to do that, we end up kind of recognizing that coaching is not about us. And so many of you will have seen this from me, but again, it's one of my favorite photos and phrases. All right. So part of this means if we're going to center the client, we have to trust that everything that needs already present. And what we're trying to do is activate something in them that allows them to attend to themselves and equip themselves. And anything that happens in this session, they will be much more likely to continue it or act on it if they feel like it came from themselves and resides in themselves when they leave. If they leave the session in awe of us, it might feel good for both of you at the time, but it also diminishes their capacity to take stock because they can't recreate for themselves what you did for them. So again, most of what we're doing is in the field with them. Most of what we're doing does not involve lots of talking. So again, it's not easily measurable by traditional competency models. But has a lot to do with evaluating what happens for clients after they leave us. So I'm going to stop there unless there's any urgent questions in the chat box, Vicky.
No, just a curiosity how people can read the paper, David.
Yeah, so as I said before, I've had a bad return of COVID this week, so I'm now it will be available tomorrow. My hope was for today, but my body had other plans. So then there's two places. The first place will be, and the link is on the last page, and you'll get an email from us tomorrow with the slides, with the recording, with access to with the link to the paper, with a link to the free tool. So all that will come to people in an email after today's session.
Great. I think that answers a curiosity that several people had.
Yeah. Yep. And so Vicky, if we could just put them in pairs for 7 minutes. And then what I'd like you to do is just pick one thing that stood out for you. While Vicky's getting all that sorted, I will say what I say in the paper. I'm not offering all this as a declaration that coaching or all of our work should be like this. I'm saying all these things because I feel like they have a lot of foundation and they're causing us to think. And so again, you might not agree with some of the things I've said, and that's great. I'm happy by that. So what do you believe and why do you believe that? And part of it for me is to surface these issues so we can talk more openly with each other and figure out where we'd like to help coaching go. How are you faring, Vicky?
Yeah, so how long do we want to have everybody in the breakout for?
7 minutes, please.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good to go.
All right. Enjoy.
And the recording. And we don't have David back yet, though, which I'm sure we will in a moment. So hopefully everybody had a good discussion.
There we go. Oh, God. We've had anybody are
That was interesting.
wait for everybody to come
Have the
back.
rooms-
Was taken back into the
Our
original.
rooms are going nuts on us, Vicky.
You didn't want
Yeah,
us
the rooms.
Vicky?
Well, it looks like the rooms reopened again, but now they're closing in 17 seconds. So hang on in there and we will all be back here together shortly.
Yeah,
Not sure what happened there. That was interesting.
I don't know.
It felt
either.
like being sent to prison. No, kind of like now you're in your single cell. And you're like talking to yourself. It
Did you have a good conversation with yourself, Rebecca?
was actually quite nice. Yes,
Oh,
actually.
good.
It was amazing. Yeah.
Nobody was
good.
talking back at you, Rebecca, right?
Yeah.
I was just sitting with myself, and that's hard, as you probably know.
Yes.
Some of the best team meetings happen that way, me, myself, and I.
Yeah. Get less
All
guff.
decisions are unanimous.
Yeah, and we get less guff from people that way too. So
Exactly.
yeah.
But my decisions aren't necessarily unanimous there.
Okay. Anyways, we'll have about another half an hour here, but I just want to see if there was something that emerged that was interesting for you from your conversations that you'd like to bring into the room.
Can share something. I can start.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the things that we were just like discussing is like how how important that is, being able to deal with silence in the room. And I still remember the times when I was a beginner coach like 13, 14 years ago, and that was the hardest skill to master. Yeah, just fight my own curiosity and just hold the room for the client and just shut up. And how important that is, and what a important skill it is to master the other person. Like Molly I was talking to, she's a mentor coach, and she said the same thing about the person that she was just like mentoring, like showed this beautiful skill of holding the room for the client, but didn't show any of the other mastery, not master competencies by the ICF as they may be supposed to, but how important it was to show that skill.
And there's sort of an irony, because at the beginning of your career as a coach, you don't talk very much either because you're not sure what to say. And then you start learning things and you talk more and more and more and more. Then you reach a certain intermediate point where you realize that's too much. And then you descend again until by the end you don't talk at all. And yeah. So I'm just conscious of the time. So I'd like to move on, and we'll hopefully have some time at the end for questions, but I do want to make sure we just address the last few slides here, and we'll see kind of where we're at. And then again, as always, you're welcome to put anything in the chat box. Like I said, I read them all after we're done, and it will be helpful for me to take this work forward. So if we think about if we had like a proper initiatory process for coaches that wasn't just about passing tests that somebody else created, but was actually about our own maturation, then we would have better support and incorporating ourselves into the larger community of practitioners. And part of the reason why that's difficult now, in addition to we don't have those processes, is that the umbrella called coaching, for example, has become huge. It means everything and nothing in some ways. And so there's a lot of different kinds of people crowded under that umbrella. And so I just took a little, not a little, I spent quite a bit of time thinking about what would be some useful distinctions that might help us begin to separate out where we kind of need to go here. So let me just share my screen again. There we go. It's back here again. Let's move ahead to this one. There we go. So I'll just let you read that for a second, because that'll set up the next slide that I want to talk to you about. So there are still sort of maxims.
So just if you can mute yourself, if you're off mute. Thanks.
There are maxims and prescriptions and measures in coaching that were there when I started nearly 30 years ago. And they were marginally relevant then. They're almost useless to me now. But coaching as a frame, as a process, has certainly expanded around. You can mute everybody on your side, Vicky. There we go.
David, you're muted.
Yeah, so I've muted you again, David. Unfortunately.
No worries.
Can you unmute yourself? Great.
I did.
But I've also muted everybody else too, which is good.
Yeah, I didn't quite catch that. That was my fault. So much about coaching has remained largely the same, even though so much around it has changed. And I think one of the great gifts that AI is bringing to coaching is it's provoking us to think harder about what humans do and who humans are and what is coaching anyways. And so one of the ways I began to move in that direction to help us begin to make those distinctions was just to come up with 4 sort of markers for a beginning of a taxonomy of coaching. So it's not just everything lumped together. So we have more, if we start on the left there, so we have more and more people, like say as parents or teachers, nurses, people, but just in their everyday life, they're trying to get better at communicating. They're trying to get better at listening. They're trying to figure out how to work across differences. And a lot of the techniques and resources from coaching, particularly as a mindset. So like, while my daughter would never really allow me to coach her, I'm able to do a number of things that inform how I parented her as she grew up. So coaching is a mindset, right? It's how somebody approaches a conversation. And then we have coaching more as a means. So this conference, there were probably a third of the participants, maybe more, were from the healthcare space, but a lot of surgeons. And then the rest were coaches. But more and more, for a number of reasons, professionals are wanting to learn to use coaching as a means to enrich their job, lift up parts of their job that they might not have paid as much attention to because their focus is on their expertise, their technical expertise. But again, many of them don't want to become coaches. So again, the usual pathways to coaching may or may not be relevant to them because they actually want to just use it to enrich what they already do. So it's just a means, but it has a little bit more rigor than just the average person on the street. And then there's people for whom coaching is what the practitioner primarily does. These I would like to see them as a member of something, but probably bodies or communities that don't really fully exist yet. The ones we have now, to varying degrees, do parts of this, but lots of this they don't. But these are people that if we had something that was moving towards a profession, would actually have a lot more rigor around it than it has now. And then lastly, again, particularly given the current state of coaching associations, there's people like myself who, and there's more and more of these as well, who are in varying degrees working what I would say is beyond coaching. Parts of coaching are an integral part of what they do, but they bring so much more to their practice. So coaching is a modality they employ at times in their work with clients, depending on when that is necessary. So each of these each of these groups of people has different levels of rigor that's involved or desired. They have different levels of loyalty or participation in larger entities. They have different development and learning needs. And so again, by starting to break apart that word coaching, it not only helps us make better distinctions to serve different audiences better, but it also, again, frees us up from the belief that everything we have now is all we need. There's a whole bunch more that I think that's coming around the ability to bring what we know about coaching into many new forms that don't really fully exist yet, and those will never happen if we're trapped in the third column. And so, but there's some people who love coaching, and that's all they want to do, and they should have more support for what they're doing that would allow them to move towards greater mastery and maturity as a coach. Just to have the last couple of pages here, and then we'll give you a little practice to play with at the end. And again, I'm trying to just do a little sample from each of the parts of the paper so you get a full sense of it. So the last one is starting to integrate. So again, as a professional, to integrate everything that's happened, everything about who they become, to become more and more masterful and mature. So you read the piece at the top. So one of the challenges is that we have objectified the elements of coaching in many ways as if they operate independently. And you could get an A on all of your tests. You'd have the perfectly stocked pantry, have all the great recipes, but none of that's the same as making a great dinner. And so one of the big recommendations in the paper is that again, looking at specifically where people are less developed to help them get better in those areas is really important. But you can deconstruct excellence into things to look at, but you can't scale pieces to create a whole. And so for me, the notion of integration has to come from a different perspective that allows us to begin to look at the bigger picture in terms of trying to then figure out how to help somebody. So I put all these together, and it's something that we're going to call the 5 maturities matrix. And it's just a way of taking each of the 5 sort of clusters of areas of focus in terms of your own development. And then there's a whole bunch more in the paper, but there's some things then to ask yourself for a given engagement or a given project or client. What am I noticing about myself? Maybe gathering some feedback from the people that are involved. So it might be, say, for example, some feedback from them is they feel technically you're very good with them and they feel very satisfied with the results, but they feel the relationship they have with you is pretty cold, and they don't feel like they therefore are getting the full value of them working with you. So it's not about changing your coaching, it's about learning how maybe to be a bit more vulnerable or a little bit more open or a little bit more emotional with them. And so in the paper, I'm just making a couple of proposals for how this might be used to help begin to either for ourselves or like on our Avita platform, ways of starting to give feedback to people or reflections for ourselves about on a given scenario, where would we most want to spend our time? And again, this is where having, and I think in time, another thing that's going to emerge as another opportunity to help us stand out, but also to further the cause of what we work with, is I think we're going to develop some new categories of people that probably include but transcend what we now think of as supervision and mentoring. I think we're going to need some other sort of roles for people to play for coaches and other practitioners to get better faster at what they're doing. All right, so just 2 more slides and then we'll stop and I'll just share with you what's coming next and see what's kind of on your mind as you're leaving this little sample. So assuming that one is, finding ways to make progress on all this, I chose the last sort of phase of an initiatory process in coaching or whatever we're working in, as we think of it as incarnation. It becomes who we are. Um, and and so I just was drawn to this quote that's attributed to Sigmund Freud. I'll let you read this, and then I'll explain why I think this is here. So for me, I feel like everything that I've been working on for 25 years and now sort of culminating in the 5 maturities is really trying to lay the groundwork for a profession that's beyond coaching. That coaching will probably continue to exist. A lot of the rudimentary parts of coaching will be taken over with technologies, which is fine, and leaves us for the harder things, the more human things that we're good at, and that's going to require a new kind of profession that's not a singular thing. But I loved his expression, the secular ministers of souls. And so for me, part of the value of the paper is to begin to imagine for yourself, and this is one of the things I'll leave you with, is if we were in a perfect world and you got paid well to do exactly what you do best, what would that look like? What might that be called? What kind of support would you want from people? How could we, what are some of the guardrails that you'd want in place? And one of the tensions we feel about standing out is we want to conform enough to be recognizable in the market and recognizable to our tribe, which is great. And at the same time, what you start to discover is that you whittle away some of your own individual genius and some of the unique things you've done with your life. So for me, I look at some traumas in my life and how I would very much like to have had them not happen. And I'm not sure I'd be sitting here doing this if I had not survived them. I wouldn't want them again, so I'm hoping they're done, but you never know. But I feel like the value of including maturity and prioritizing maturity is I believe in the times that are ahead of us. The skills that we have are going to less and less be differentiating about who we are. Everybody's going to have access to those skills and those resources. What's going to make a difference is who you are as a human being. Can you hold space for difficult conversations? Can you help improvise and innovate around conflict and tension? Can you model for your clients ways of living that would be helpful to them? Can you imagine different ways of positioning and packaging yourself to align with what people actually need most, and move away from the attachment in some of our spaces to the bright and shiny and the notions of gurus and things that are really not very helpful in the end. So I'm all for this vision of could we create, whether or not it ever becomes, I suspect it may not become a profession. It'll become something more like an integral association or confederation or something. But that notion of secular ministers of the souls really appeals to me. And that's going to take some processes of developing ourselves we often don't have yet, or we seek outside of our profession. So people that participate in other rites of passage or sacred medicines or sort of sacred travel or exposure to culture or things that do that for them. But there's sort of an initiation that I think needs to happen to a higher level of thinking about our craft that's far beyond what is now measured for most of the time. So I came across this a couple of days ago and I just thought he's writing about something else, but I just loved his languaging around apprenticeships, which is one of the recommendations in the paper. So I'll let you just read this, and then we'll bring the conversation to a close. Mm. Mm. So my take from this, and I would love to hear yours in the chat box, but um, so if you were to interview most people that became shamans, healers, teachers in their traditional or indigenous communities, very few of them would say, "Yeah, wow, I'm so excited, can't wait." It often was a very arduous process, either through illness, mental illness, injury, weather. Many of them didn't want it. Matter of fact, it's quite common for them to refuse it at first until life had other ideas for them. And so we have this idea, if I just took enough classes, I would become better, which could happen. But a lot of what actually an apprenticeship does, in the best sense of that word, is it creates a container for initiation. And there's a lot of things that people are putting their lives and themselves in our hands when they come to work with us. And so for me, I just feel like, on one hand, a way to kind of let go of some of the boxes that we're put in, but at the same time to become more rigorous in how we develop ourselves and support each other's development. And I think, like I've said, I think that will become essential as time goes on. So the last piece here. So what's in the works? So we're, like I said, the paper will be up on our website. It'll be up on the IOC website by the end of the year, of the week. But we're also starting up, some ways continuing a project for people that are doing research or doing like graduate studies, or are involved in things in our project, to begin to figure out where are some of the, if we were to build a bridge in a different direction, we already have the beautiful Golden Gate coaching bridge. But if we were to build a bridge over to the Headlands or over to Berkeley, for those of you who know that part of the world, where would the first pylon be? And who would we gather there? And what would they want to create? We're also putting together some designs for some retreats, to be able to take this work and use it as a frame to really sort of compost a lot of what we're carrying at the moment, and really distill ourselves down to our essence and understand what it is that we need to do to advance our own development. And then when I was in Boston, I came up with this really cool idea, based on what somebody asked of me, which was to create some study groups. And so we're working on that as well. And so my question for you is, what do you need most right now? What's sort of, like I said, here's the paper, here's the link if you want to join us for a 6-part series with IOC to kind of go much deeper into this in terms of what it means for designing your future. And here's the stuff about me is not on the website yet, that's coming, but you can find out about Avita there. But I'm just curious, what is coming up for you in terms of what you sense from all of this that would be meaningful for you right now? What is it you're hungering for, aching for, wish you had, that would help you at this stage in your career? And then I'm going to take all this down. And again, you're welcome to put this in the chat box. Again, this is very helpful to me to know what to build in terms of what you're looking for and what is attracting you, what's not. So anything you can offer there. So Fiona.
David, that last slide, or second last slide of the
Yeah.
quotes, really hit me square in the heart.
Mm.
for the last few years since I initially was introduced to you and I met you, life has taken on a very different flavor or profile anyway that I would had even imagined. And while I can sit back and call it, oh God, that this is a tough portion of my life, and to go down that rabbit hole, that quote is further emphasizing the need to look at it as an apprenticeship in a certain portion of my life where I am living, where I'm honing, where I'm really curating my craft. Messaging. So thank you for sharing that, because that was pretty profound. And what I'm looking for is, how do I get back onto the saddle and bring what I've apprenticed through and what I've learned through and all of that to yet a higher level of where I was at.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, and we've got lots of responses coming in the chat, David, to that question.
Excellent.
Of what people want and need. So it's very rich.
Yeah. And I guess my other question too is, how do you feel about all this? What does it emotionally bring up in you in terms of, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we covered in 90 minutes, but yeah. Yeah, Kent. I'll come back to her.
Quickly. Yeah, thank you. Ditto to everything that's been said. One of the things I'm noticing with it myself, and I noticed a little bit in the chat box with others too, is many of us are very drawn to you and your work, and there seems to be like an almost existential, drawing there, so to speak. And so part of what I'm fussing with right now is what does that signal within myself that I need to that I can attend to, so that the goal is not to just hang around David Moore or be more like David, but to figure out what is it that he triggers within me that has the opportunity to come forth.
Yes, and so one of our lines of business is going to be making little bobble dolls that you can put on the dash in your car. So you have a little David that can go everywhere with you. Yeah. No. Have you ever heard me talking about that? Can't you just come over to my house and slap me? No. Let's see. Somebody else had their hand up. Maybe it's
Per, I think.
Oh, Per, yes.
Was it?
All right, so sorry. Like I'll write it, because now I can't resist the idea of having a David Drake slapping bobblehead with like or something and go speed it up.
All right. Yeah.
No, clearly, David. I mean, you're leading a movement. I mean, like everybody's talking about the deep connection and the resonance that this has. So tapping into something that's or releasing, with depending on where you are in the maturity model, all that kind of stuff. But often, well, at least in my experience, there's that bridge of saying like, okay, because you're talking about like extra, like outside of the career, and it's going to be a new thing, and like scaffolding around, like kind of how you helped the ICF originally, right? I guess I am like looking forward to saying like, okay, like yes, drawn to that idea, but how do we actually propagate from where we're at? And again, not bumpers and rails, but actually start coming together with plans of not creating another coaching swamp. And how does this actually become something that we can actually live and resonate with, and then do the advocacy work along with living a pretty full, rich life. So that looking forward to seeing that plan.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the last thing I want to do is create another thing. Right. The world doesn't need any more things. But again, even imagining how we go about that, as you're describing, even doing that differently. And I don't go to a lot of conferences anymore much, but when I do, I always try to find outliers in their own field, because I know they're going to be more like me than many coaches. And you just see the hunger for people to almost to like stand still in order to stand out, to then find others they can stand with, if you will, who understand the journey they're on, maybe are at a similar place in their journey, but maybe in a different field. And I feel like one of the reasons I enjoy the conference I went to is because you're talking from people across industries, but many of them are faced with the same dilemmas. But they have a different perspective, they have different strengths, different challenges, but it just makes for very robust conversations. And so, yeah, so my job again is not to be a Pied Piper, but to say, here's some things, take it out, plant some seeds, find some others that you care about who seem to be interested in something similar, and we'll create some structure around that and some touch points, and then sort of see what happens. So, all right, I just want to be conscious and honor your time. I want to thank you very much for coming to join us. I know some of you have gotten up really early to be here, and some of you have stayed up late, so really grateful for that. It's always lovely to see such wonderful faces. And so, like I said, the paper will be up tomorrow, God willing, and you'll get an email with all the things you need to know about all of that tomorrow from Steve. And we'll start doing some more things in this space, so stay tuned. And if you want to come join us and take a deeper dive, come join the IOC webinar. Should be fun. And otherwise, we'll see you again next time around. All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
David.
Vicky.
Thank you, everybody.